Good morning to all of you. Thank you very much for inviting me for this very important meeting, which is discussing on Food Forum, the East Asia Pacific Food Forum 2017. And I would like to express my appreciation for the Minister of Health who's hosting this important forum and inviting me to speak here. And I'm asked to discuss about food, international trade, and changing global economy, a new direction for Asia and the Pacific. I do hope that I can fit with the expectation. Let me start what is happening with the world. The current global economy has been changed quite dramatically in the past decade, in which the role of developing countries in the global economy has increasing significantly, either in terms of the share to the world GDP or in terms of even the population shift. While many rich countries has actually now having the aging population, many developing countries is still producing population that make them have a window of opportunity of demographic bonus or demographic dividend. If you look at this map, you will see that the United States, European Union, or Latin America, the Arab world, Sub-Saharan Middle East, North Africa, and East Asia and Pacific. For the East Asia and Pacific, the population is reached 2.3 billion. For Indonesia, if we are looking for 15 or 16 years ahead of us, then we are talking about the population which is going to reach much above 300 or even close to 350 million population. That will definitely create both challenge as well as opportunity. What is going to be the future challenge for us? First, of course, that the world with 9 billion population reaching by 2030, this is going to be a huge number that need to then have to maintain the coexistence among those population in a peace and safe environment. Geopolitical situation is constantly creating a tension, whether within country or across country. For current situation, even in East Asia, which is recognized as the most safest and secure and place, we are also witnessing a tension between the North Korean with the US. We also see the US protectionism, which is creating an idea for many other countries to follow the suit. And we all know that the protectionism is not going to serve any country good, because many developing countries or even advanced countries enjoy such a welfare, or in this case, shared prosperity, because of the global trade, openness and global trade. So this is going to be a challenge that needs to be addressed by many policymakers, all policymakers in the world. And of course, we have some of the conflict and fragile state that is creating a refugee flow and also some regional conflict. The world is also facing with a rapid technological development, a driverless car, an artificial intelligence, Internet of Things. We just have a news today that the Saudi Arabia is actually providing a citizenship of one robot. So this is one thing which we are talking about, the change which is happening, but the most concerning is the speed of change, which maybe cannot be matched with the ability of the policymaker to respond with this change. This technological development have a huge implication, positive and some worrying. The positive side, for example, the productivity. If you talk about the agriculture and especially food security, energy security, they all have the opportunity to be addressed or to be solved with the technology. We are talking about more productivity of the human capital. It's going to be also increased because of the technology. But the worrying part of this technological change is being widely recognized. The implication toward the labor absorption or job creation is actually widely recognized by many policymakers. So the issue about how the world should respond to this opportunity without creating a suffering of some population which is left behind of this progress. So the concept of development for agriculture, food, energy, transportation, and construction is definitely going to be affected. And when we talk about the food security, or even nutrition, this is definitely very relevant. Are we going to have a more efficient, with a more population, with the same land, we are going to produce more? Are we going to have a more mobility that will require us to be able to respond to this mobility of the people within the country or across country globally? And are we going to be able to give a much more information that will make people have a better, healthy diet? So it's not necessarily that you are going to eat more, but you are going to eat right, so that you are going to be able to have a healthy population. Food security, energy security, and water supply is becoming a key factors for many economic activity in the world. And improvement in the technology and innovation is definitely going to create both opportunity of increasing productivity, but also a challenge, as I mentioned earlier. Food security become prominent issue due to rapid growth in global population. If you can see that Africa is the region that is affected most by food scarcity, not only weather related, but also the way that they are managing the resource within the continent. For Indonesia, as a big country, which more conscious of water than land, that's definitely going to be also one of the issues that need to be addressed. Indonesia currently ranks 71 out of 113 countries in the Food Security Index. This is just to show that for us, as among the biggest population in the world, the food security is constantly become an issue. How the government responding to that? I think we are currently addressing the issue by learning from many major institutions who are producing a good quality of advice and policy prescription that can really enriching the way we define our own direction. The Global Agriculture and Food Security Program under the World Bank in this case is also providing a food security program to all over the world. For Indonesia, although as I said earlier that we are more an island country, we have 18,000 islands located around the equator lines that lies between two continents, that is Asia and Australia, Oceania. We have the opportunity to address this issue, but definitely the challenge is not easy. Geographically, Indonesia can provide substantial natural resource which is not only needed by us, but also globally. That will require a huge coordination, not only across ministerial, that is Ministry of Agriculture, Public Work, or even Ministry of Fishery in Indonesia, but also between central government and local government. Because for Indonesia as a big country, the political system in which decentralizing to the local government has become the way we manage this country, meaning that the close coordination and collaboration between national government and local government is going to be very, very important. We have more than 350 districts in which they are in charge for many of the infrastructure up to the health and education. What is our National Strategic Development Plan, which is called as Nawacita in Indonesia, putting the food security in our development plan priority? Food security is among the priority sector development which is put by President Jokowi and Vice President Kala. But if you look at the more comprehensive development, economic development in Indonesia, there is a human dimension, and that's why the human development improvement is one of the most important pillars for us, in which health, education, housing, and even characters or value of the people is very important. The second is on a production or priority sectors, in which the government of Indonesia put food and energy, including maritime and marine and tourist industry as the most important area that constantly have a higher priority, both in terms of policy as well as in a budget allocation. And of course, we are addressing the third very important dimension of development, that is the equitable development. This is because Indonesia, as an island country, there is uneven development across region or across island Indonesia. Currently, we are very much focused in this capital city of Jakarta. If many of you is visited this country for this event, please don't just look in Jakarta. You may have a wrong impression as if Indonesia looks like Jakarta. We are not. Jakarta and the rest of Java is different, and Java with the rest of Indonesia is also different. And this is the challenge which the government recognizes. And that's why the President Jokowi and Vice President Kala is emphasizing the development from the frontier in order for us to be able to create connectivity and, most importantly, to share prosperity across population and across region. And the necessary condition for us to implement the development is, of course, legal certainty, law enforcement, security and order, politics and democracy, and a good governance. The agriculture sector in Indonesia is still very important. If we look at the number of employment in the total employment of Indonesia, currently 31.9% still work under the agriculture sector. While at the same time, the contribution to the GDP is actually steadily declined, which is only less than 13%. This is creating an issue, as I mentioned earlier, not only the productivity, but also the prosperity of those who work in agriculture sectors. Government of Indonesia commit to increase budget for national security and improving the welfare of the farmer. The amount of budget to support food security, including production capacity improvement, which is directly the budget to the Minister of Agriculture, food diversification program from the very upstream, like the Minister of Agriculture, to the Minister of Health and others who actually try to educate people to become more diversified in their nutrition. Farmer welfare improvement, food price stabilization, agriculture infrastructure rehabilitation, these are all the area which is included in the food security program. Indonesia in the past 3 years and heading to this 5 years terms of this government is paying attention to the infrastructure of the agriculture. One indicators like the irrigation, which is actually in a poor situation or bad situation in 2014 is around 46%. And with all the program on the infrastructure, the government of Indonesia currently has improving the irrigation quality up to the 90% in the position of good. And if you look at the food security program, it is not only the responsibility of the Minister of Agriculture. In Indonesia, that means also require the work of Minister of Public Work, which is related, some of it is in the irrigation, but most importantly, connecting the farm to the off-farm and the market. But also in terms of providing support for the farmer directly, for example, like subsidy for fertilizer. I must say that Indonesia still need to learn to make sure that this subsidy can be really enjoyed by the farmer, as well as transfer to region. As I said, Indonesia is a very big, complex country in which the political system has been decentralized to the local level. So role of the local government is very, very important. The agriculture sector objective in our program are motivated by food security. Currently, the government is focusing on developing new farm, or in this case, rehabilitation the existing one. That's including creating the new rice farm outside Java Island. The development of 33 new dams, villages that independently produce seeds, and we also currently also notice that being and nurturing an organic way of planting is going to be very important. We also developing new paddy field area, new farming field, and supported by the regulation on the food import to prevent cartel. This is mostly important for the price formation at the rice that will be enjoyed and affected by the household in Indonesia. And for the poor country, that's including the poor farmer, Indonesia is providing rice subsidy that is 15 kilos per month per house. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, a fertilizer subsidy for the farmer. Food security depends on the productivity of the farmer. And we are all recognize that the farmer is always constantly in a vulnerable situation. Not only that they are too much dependent on their harvest, but their harvest is also affected by the weather, which is constantly now changed and is becoming even more challenging with the climate change. So for the farmer to be able for them to constantly have a good situation with their own prosperity, not affected too significantly by the weather, the government of Indonesia is now creating an insurance for the farmer. If you look at the Indonesia now, we have more or almost 75,000 villages in Indonesia. 82.7% villages actually depend on agriculture sector, and they work as a farmer. So you can imagine how important the dimension of creating welfare for them and protecting the welfare of the farmer in Indonesia. What is the potential of the villages in Indonesia? 61,000 more is actually have a big potential on farming, 20,000 more in plantation, 12,000 more in fisheries, 64,000 in a new renewable energy, 1,900 or almost 2,000 in tourism, and 1.8 million is actually a place for the small and medium enterprises to work. And the government of Indonesia continue to make sure that the intervention of the policy will address from the upstream to the downstream, or the whole food chains, or the whole ecosystem for the food security. What is the example of the government involvement in creating food stabilization price, which is important not only for the consumer in Indonesia, but also a farmer. We have a stabilization of food price through our program that's including management of the government food reserve, provision of the distribution of food for the poor, in case that the weather is affecting severely, Indonesia is also willing to import food and rice, and development of the food and rice industry, as well as modernizing the warehouse in Indonesia. This is just to make sure that the food stock and security can be distributed across Indonesia. Policy on agriculture insurance, which I mentioned earlier, is very important for the farmer to be able to withstand the uncertainty, especially coming from the bad weather. The premium rate now is actually 3% of the insurance coverage, or 180,000 rupiah, in which 80% of the premium is paid by the government and 20% is paid by the farmer. This is still a very early new instrument for Indonesia. I know part of the world in my own capacity working in the World Bank that this is among the most important instrument in order for the government to be able to create a social safety net, especially for the farmer. And that's why we are going to continue improving this instrument in order for us to be able to protect farmer, especially facing with the uncertainty related to the weather. I know some of you is going to address this issue of the farmer on climate change. Maybe I'm not going to address this issue, or the farmer with the nutrition, and this is related to another very important aspect or priority of the government, that is combating or addressing the issue of stunting in Indonesia. But this is again because it is hosted by Minister of Health. Minister Nila is going to be the one who's going to speak more on that area. Another thing that the Indonesian government would like to improve in terms of our policy is digitizing the Indonesian food subsidy. This is not only in terms of data collection, but also in terms of distributing scheme. So previously, the family, the poor family, which is defined as a poor family, they are actually receiving a cash transfer from the government. And now we are changing into a cashless, so they are going to have the card, which then can create also another spillover on the financial inclusion. At the same time, we are going to also empower the economic activity of the village level, because in the past, when the poor family receiving in kind from the government, the challenge is actually more on a logistic and governance. Today, we actually can empower many of small retailer. In Indonesia, we call it warung. So they actually can become a place in producing the food as well as subsidized commodity for the people who need. And that can create not only helping and creating social safety net for the poor family, but it's also creating a supply chains in which the activity of the economy can be revitalized with this kind of subsidy activity of the government. And of course, we also want to make sure that this is going to also align well with the government-owned priority that is deepening financial inclusion in Indonesia. So that is the area which the government is trying to address the issue of food security in Indonesia. And of course, this is not only the job of one minister. This is the job of a cross-ministerial, as well as the job of the national government with the local government. As Indonesia is going to host annual meeting IMF World Bank next year, this country is also willing to share our experience, both which is good, but also sometimes fail, not to be repeated by other countries, but we would like to share our experience in improving our development program, especially on food security and addressing the issue of poverty and share prosperity with other countries. On the other hand, with this kind of event, we would like to also learn from other countries in which we are going to be able to improve our policy and program. And certainly, in closing, I would like to congratulate Minister of Health in hosting this very important event, and I do hope for all stakeholders to be able to provide their best thinking and intervention that can be then used for all of us to learn and improve the policy and program for the prosperity of the people. Thank you very much.